The evening sun was slowly fading over the small town of Brookside, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was one of those quiet summer nights when most people were either heading home from work or enjoying dinner with their families. The streets were calm, the kind of calm that made the town feel safe and familiar. Down at the corner of Lincoln Avenue, a young woman named Alicia Grant stopped at a gas station to refill her car. She was coming back from a local charity event hosted by her university, still wearing a neat white blouse and a light blue skirt. Her phone buzzed with messages from her friends sharing photos from the evening. She smiled as she scrolled through them, unaware that her life was about to take a sudden, frightening turn. Alicia had grown up in Brookside. She knew most people by face, if not by name. Her father, Thomas Grant, had served as the town's mayor for nearly 5 years. He was known for being calm, patient, and deeply involved in community work. Alicia had always admired how her father carried himself, how he spoke kindly even when people disagreed with him. Being the mayor's daughter, however, also meant that people noticed her wherever she went. As she stood by her car, the sound of a police siren broke through the quiet. She turned her head slightly, seeing the flashing blue lights reflect off the glass windows of the gas station. A police car pulled up behind her vehicle, the lights still spinning. She frowned, confused. She hadn't been speeding and she was parked properly by the pump. The door of the patrol car opened and a tall police officer stepped out. His expression was firm, unreadable. Alicia couldn't remember ever seeing him before, though she knew most of the officers by name. He walked toward her, his shoes clicking sharply against the pavement. "Evening, officer," Alicia said, her voice polite but uncertain. "Is something wrong?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked at her car, then at her, and then glanced at the registration sticker on the windshield. "License and registration," he said flatly. "Sure," she replied, reaching into her bag for her wallet. "Can I ask what this is about?" The officer's tone stayed cold. "Routine check." Alicia nodded and handed him her license. She tried to stay calm. She knew how tense some traffic stops could become. Even when people did everything right, she kept her hands visible and her movements slow. Inside, though, she felt uneasy. Something about the officer's eyes made her nervous, like he wasn't just doing his job but looking for something that wasn't there. He examined her license, then glanced back at her. "Where are you coming from?" "The university event downtown," she replied. It was a fundraiser for the community center. The officer tilted his head slightly as if trying to judge whether she was telling the truth. "You live around here?" "Yes, I do. On Pine Street." He stared at her for a moment longer, then walked around her car, shining his flashlight even though the sun hadn't completely set. Alicia watched him check the tires, the trunk, and even peer through the backseat window. The gas station clerk, a young man inside the store, noticed what was happening and leaned forward on the counter, curious but cautious. After a few minutes, the officer came back to her side. "You own this car?" he asked. "Yes, it's registered under my name," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He didn't respond. Instead, he spoke into his radio, his words quiet and hard to make out. The tension in the air grew heavier by the second. A couple of people who were pumping gas nearby began whispering to one another, wondering what was going on. Alicia felt her hands tremble slightly. She wasn't sure if she should say anything more or just wait. She could feel her heart thumping faster, not out of guilt but out of fear of the unknown. The way the officer kept looking at her made her feel small, like she was being judged for something beyond her control. "Officer," she said gently, "if I did something wrong, I'd like to understand what it was." The officer narrowed his eyes. "Just answer what I ask you," he said sharply. His tone stung. Alicia felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. She had grown up being taught to respect the police, to follow instructions, to remain calm, but this didn't feel like a fair interaction. This felt personal. From inside the convenience store, the clerk began recording the scene with his phone, sensing that something wasn't right. His hands shook a little as he tried to keep the camera steady. Another car pulled into the station, and an older couple inside noticed the flashing lights. They stopped to watch, uneasy. Everyone seemed to sense that the situation was not normal, that it was slowly crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. The officer started asking more questions, many of them unnecessary. Where was she going next? Who was she meeting? Why was she driving alone? Alicia answered each one as calmly as she could, but the officer's tone kept growing harsher, as if he wanted to find a reason to escalate things. Inside her, a quiet panic began to grow. She wished her father could be there, or at least that someone from the department she knew would arrive. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to give the officer any reason to think she was being disrespectful or emotional. She just wanted the stop to end. Minutes felt like hours. The orange sky turned darker, and the soft hum of traffic filled the background. Every sound seemed louder. The hiss of the gas pump, the chirp of crickets, the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Can I please know why you stopped me?" Alicia asked again, her voice calm but slightly trembling now. The officer looked at her without expression. "I'll tell you when I'm done." By now, 2 more people at the station had started recording. The sight of the cameras made Alicia feel slightly safer, knowing that at least someone was watching. Then, suddenly, another police car pulled up. The second officer who stepped out recognized Alicia immediately. His expression changed from neutral to concerned. He walked quickly toward them. "Hey," he said to the first officer, lowering his voice. "That's the mayor's daughter." The first officer paused. For a second, the silence between them was thick. The people nearby exchanged confused looks. "What?" the first officer asked, frowning. "That's Alicia Grant," the second officer repeated. "Mayor Grant's kid." The first officer's face went blank. His posture shifted slightly. He looked at Alicia again, really looked this time, and a flicker of realization crossed his eyes. The tension in the air didn't disappear, but it changed. He stepped back, clearing his throat awkwardly. The second officer, trying to calm things down, spoke directly to Alicia. "Miss Grant, I'm sorry for the trouble. You can go ahead and finish up here." Alicia nodded, her heart still racing. She glanced at the first officer, who avoided her gaze. The crowd around them stayed quiet, unsure what they had just witnessed. After a few more seconds, the first officer muttered something under his breath and walked back to his patrol car. The flashing lights turned off. The night felt suddenly heavier, like the calm had been replaced by something uncertain and uneasy. Alicia finished paying for her gas, thanked the clerk softly, and got back into her car. Her hands were still shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. She sat there for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to steady herself. When she finally drove away, she couldn't stop thinking about how quickly a simple evening had turned into something terrifying. She had done nothing wrong, yet for a few long minutes she had felt powerless, judged, misunderstood, and small. At home later that night, she told her father what happened. The color drained from his face as she described the officer's behavior. He listened quietly, asking her to recount every detail. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he sat back in his chair, his hands clasped together. "Did anyone see it?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said. "There were people recording." He nodded slowly. "All right," he replied. "We'll handle this the right way." Outside, the crickets continued to sing. Inside the Grant home, the air was filled with a mix of fear, anger, and relief. Fear of what could have happened, anger at what had, and relief that Alicia had made it home safely. But neither of them knew that the night's events were only the beginning. The video recorded by bystanders would soon make its way online. Within hours, Brookside would wake up to headlines they never expected to read, and the quiet little town would never feel quite the same again. The next morning, the town of Brookside didn't wake up to its usual calm. The sunlight that filtered through kitchen windows and coffee shops felt the same, but the air carried something new, a quiet buzz of whispers, messages, and curiosity. Overnight, a short video clip had begun to spread online, first through local group chats, then on social media pages. It showed a police officer standing at a gas station, his posture tense, speaking sharply to a young woman beside her car. At first, people only shared it because it seemed strange. A police officer acting unreasonably toward someone who appeared calm and polite. But within an hour, someone added a caption, "That's the mayor's daughter." That single sentence changed everything. The video spread faster. By morning, almost everyone in town had seen it. In living rooms, offices, and schools, people replayed it again and again, zooming in, turning up the volume, trying to make sense of what had happened. Alicia woke up to a phone full of notifications. Her friends had sent her messages asking if she was okay. A few of them sounded worried. Others were angry. She hadn't expected the video to reach so many people so quickly. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in her pajamas, feeling her stomach twist as she scrolled through the comments. Some people supported her, calling what happened unfair and wrong. Others were skeptical, writing things like, "We don't know the full story," or "Maybe the officer was just doing his job." Her father, Mayor Thomas Grant, had already been up for hours. He had received a call from the town's police chief early that morning, informing him that the department was aware of the video and that an internal review had been started. The mayor listened silently on the phone, his voice calm but distant. After hanging up, he walked into the kitchen where Alicia sat quietly, a mug of tea in her hands. "You doing okay?" he asked gently. "I guess," she said, not looking up. "It's just weird. Everyone's talking about it." He nodded slowly, pulling out a chair across from her. "I know, and they will keep talking for a while." She sighed. "I didn't even want it to go public." "I understand," he said softly. "But sometimes things like this come to light because they have to. It's uncomfortable, but it can also make change happen." Alicia looked at him, unsure whether she wanted change or just peace. That same morning, the police department held a short press briefing. The police chief stood at the podium, flanked by 2 other officers. He confirmed that there had been an incident involving Officer Daniel Mercer and a local resident. He didn't say names, but everyone already knew who he meant. The chief promised that a full review would take place and that the department would be transparent about the findings. Reporters filled the small conference room, cameras flashing. Questions flew through the air. Was the stop justified? Was the officer suspended? Did he know who she was at the time? The chief kept his answers short and careful. Meanwhile, on social media, the debate kept growing. Some people shared stories of their own bad experiences with the same officer. Others defended him, saying he was just following protocol. But one thing was clear. The town was divided, and emotions were rising. Later that day, Alicia's best friend, a young woman named Leah, stopped by her house. She came with food and a warm hug. "You know it's everywhere, right?" Leah said softly. "People are even posting about it on town forums." Alicia nodded. "I know. I didn't think something like this could happen here." Leah gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Everyone's talking about how brave you were. You stayed calm even when he was being awful. Not many people could do that." "I wasn't brave," Alicia replied quietly. "I was scared." Leah placed a hand on her arm. "That's exactly why it matters." While Alicia stayed home, her father headed to City Hall for meetings. The phone at his office rang nonstop. Reporters, concerned residents, community leaders, and even a few council members wanting to know what his next move would be. The mayor stayed composed, his voice steady as he repeated that the matter was under investigation and that he trusted the process. But deep down he felt something heavier. He had always believed in fairness and due process, but now the system he'd defended for years had failed someone he loved. By the afternoon, national news outlets had picked up the story. What had started as a local controversy now had reporters arriving from nearby cities, parking news vans outside the police department. They wanted interviews, reactions, statements, anything. At the gas station where it all happened, people stopped by to look at the spot, some taking photos. The clerk who had filmed part of the encounter was now being contacted by journalists asking for permission to use the footage. He had never meant to become part of something so big. When he talked about it later, he said he started recording because something felt off. The way the officer spoke, the tone in his voice, and it didn't seem right. "I just thought if something goes wrong, there should be proof," he told one local station. By evening, a small group of residents had gathered outside the police department, holding signs that said things like accountability for all and justice, not excuses. The protest was peaceful, filled with people of all backgrounds. Some were longtime residents. Others were students from the local college. They sang quietly, some holding candles as the sun went down. Inside the department, the mood was tense. Officers avoided talking about the video openly, but everyone knew it was the only topic on anyone's mind. Some of them had worked with Mercer for years, and while they didn't all agree with his actions, they felt uneasy seeing one of their own being publicly criticized. Others whispered that this was bound to happen sooner or later, that Mercer's attitude had been a problem for a long time. At home, Alicia and her father watched the news together. The footage played again, this time with commentary from analysts discussing police behavior and public trust. Seeing it replayed over and over made Alicia's stomach tighten. It didn't feel like her life anymore. It felt like a story that belonged to everyone else. Her father put a hand on her shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," he said softly. "I know," she replied, "but it still feels awful." He looked at her, seeing how tired she was, how heavy her eyes looked. "We'll get through this," he said. "But I want you to stay strong. Don't read everything online. Don't let people's words get inside your head." She nodded, though she wasn't sure how to stop herself from reading. The internet had a way of pulling her in even when it hurt. That night, long after her father went to bed, Alicia sat on the porch with her laptop open. She scrolled through the comments again, some kind, some cruel. Then she saw one that simply said, "If this can happen to her, it can happen to anyone." She read that line several times, feeling a mix of sadness and understanding. The next day brought more attention. A morning talk show mentioned the case, and activists began organizing a community meeting to discuss it. The mayor was invited to speak, and though he wasn't sure what to say, he knew he had to show up. When he stood before the crowd that evening, the room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall, and townspeople filled every seat. He spoke slowly, with sincerity in his voice. "I'm here tonight not just as your mayor," he began, "but as a father. What happened to my daughter should never have happened to anyone. We all deserve respect, fairness, and safety, no matter who we are or where we come from." The room was quiet as he spoke. Some people nodded. Others wiped tears from their eyes. It wasn't just about one moment at a gas station anymore. It was about trust, something that once broken takes years to rebuild. When the meeting ended, people walked up to thank him. Some shared stories of their own experiences, small moments where they felt unseen or treated unfairly. The mayor listened to each one, his expression serious and compassionate. As the crowd slowly left, a few reporters approached him for more comments. He declined, saying simply, "Right now, I just want to focus on my family and on what's right for this town." Outside, the night air was cool and still. The streets were quiet again, but the silence felt different. Not peaceful, but expectant. Something had started in Brookside that couldn't be ignored or forgotten. And while Alicia tried to go about her days as normally as possible, she could feel it too. A change in how people looked at her, spoke to her, even smiled at her. Some offered sympathy. Others avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say. But one thing was certain. Nothing would be quite the same again. The days after the community meeting felt heavy but hopeful. Brookside was a small town, yet the noise around the incident refused to fade. People were talking in barbershops, at grocery stores, in church gatherings, and even during school drop-offs. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some said it was about accountability. Others believed it was just a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But no matter what side people took, one thing was clear. The town couldn't ignore what had happened anymore. For Alicia, the attention was overwhelming. She couldn't walk through town without feeling eyes on her. At the library, people whispered when she passed. At the coffee shop, the barista looked nervous when handing her the drink, unsure whether to mention the story or stay quiet. Her phone kept buzzing with messages, some from reporters, others from strangers thanking her for staying calm that night. She appreciated the kind words, but deep down, she just wanted things to go back to normal. She wanted to focus on school, on her volunteer work, on her life, not on what everyone else thought of her. Her father, meanwhile, was facing his own pressure. As mayor, he was caught between his personal feelings and his public duty. Every move he made was being watched. Each time he walked into his office, there were reporters waiting outside City Hall, microphones ready, hoping for a new quote. He stayed polite, answering what he could, but he often chose silence over speculation. Behind closed doors, though, he was deeply troubled. He had dedicated years to building trust between the community and the police. Now, all that work felt fragile. The police department had officially placed Officer Mercer on administrative leave pending investigation. That announcement brought temporary relief to some, but others felt it wasn't enough. Many people believed that if there hadn't been video evidence, nothing would have been done at all. One afternoon, a group of high school students organized a peaceful march through downtown Brookside. They held up signs calling for respect, fairness, and unity. It wasn't an angry protest. It was quiet, thoughtful, and full of young energy. Families joined in, walking with candles and homemade posters. Alicia didn't attend the march, but she watched the live stream online. Her eyes filled with tears as she saw people, many she didn't even know, walking for something bigger than her experience. It was strange, she thought, how one night at a gas station had turned into something that touched an entire town. A week later, she received a call from a local journalist who wanted to do an interview. It could help people understand what you went through, the reporter said gently. Alicia hesitated. She didn't like being the center of attention, but after talking it through with her father, she agreed. The interview was filmed in her living room. She spoke slowly and carefully, describing how she had felt during the encounter, the fear, the confusion, and the uncertainty. She didn't sound angry. She sounded honest. The video of her interview went viral again, but this time the comments were filled with compassion. People admired how calm and respectful she was. Her story began to inspire others to share their own experiences. Some were small, others serious, but all spoke about the same thing: the feeling of not being seen, of being judged unfairly. The town council decided to hold a public hearing to address concerns about police behavior. It was the first time in years that such a meeting drew so many people. The room was packed. Even the hallway outside was full. Residents lined up to speak, some praising the police for their hard work, others sharing stories of fear or mistrust. When it was the mayor's turn to speak, the room went silent. He stood behind the wooden podium, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We can't change what happened," he said, "but we can decide what happens next. This is not just about one person or one officer. This is about who we are as a community. Do we choose to learn from this, or do we turn away and pretend it never happened?" His words were met with a mix of applause and thoughtful silence. Even those who disagreed with him couldn't deny his sincerity. Later that evening, after the meeting ended, he returned home to find Alicia sitting on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders. She looked up as he walked over. "You did well tonight," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I don't know if it was enough." "It's a start," she replied. He sat beside her, the two of them watching the quiet street. For a moment, they didn't need words. The bond between them felt stronger than ever. As the investigation continued, more details came to light. Reports from previous years showed that Officer Mercer had received several complaints from residents. Nothing major enough to get him fired, but enough to show a pattern. Most of those complaints had been marked as resolved or unsubstantiated. That news added more fuel to public frustration. Inside the police department, morale was mixed. Some officers felt angry at Mercer for putting their reputation on the line. Others defended him quietly, saying that the public didn't understand how stressful their work could be. The chief tried to keep things calm, but the tension was hard to ignore. One evening, the mayor met privately with the police chief. They had known each other for years, both trying in their own ways to serve the town. The meeting wasn't easy. "I need you to be honest with me," the mayor said. "Was there any sign that this could happen?" The chief sighed deeply. "We knew Mercer had a temper, but he'd been warned before. Nothing this serious ever happened." The mayor looked down, disappointment clear on his face. "Warnings aren't enough anymore," he said. "We need to fix this system before it breaks again." The chief nodded slowly. "I agree." Outside the office, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. It seemed to match the mood of the whole town. Everyone was tired, waiting for answers. Meanwhile, Alicia tried to find balance in her life again. She returned to her university classes. Though the first few days were uncomfortable, some students whispered when she entered the room. Others smiled shyly but didn't know what to say. Her professors treated her with kindness, often checking in to make sure she was doing okay. At first, she felt like the incident had taken something from her confidence, her sense of ease. But slowly she started to rebuild. She joined a student group focused on equality and social awareness, sharing her story to help others understand how easily small moments can change lives. Through those meetings, she began to feel stronger, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted her experience to mean something. Back in town, people continued to hold discussions, community events, and small neighborhood meetings. For the first time, conversations that were once uncomfortable were happening out in the open. Parents talked with their children about fairness. Teachers discussed respect and understanding in classrooms. Even at the police department, Officers began attending new training sessions on communication and community relations. It was slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. Then one morning, nearly a month after the incident, the police department released a short public statement. The investigation, they said, was complete. The findings would be reviewed by an independent committee before final decisions were made. The mayor read the statement carefully. He knew it was just the beginning of another chapter, one that would bring both relief and more questions. That evening, he and Alicia sat together in their living room, the soft light of the television flickering across the walls. They didn't say much. Both of them were thinking about what might come next, whether justice would truly be served and whether the town would be able to move forward peacefully. After a long pause, Alicia spoke quietly. "No matter what happens, I hope people remember that this isn't about hate. It's about respect." Her father looked at her and smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I've been trying to teach this town for years." They both laughed softly, sharing a moment of warmth in the middle of so much uncertainty. Outside, the streets of Brookside were calm again, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the damp pavement. But under that calm, something had changed forever. People were more aware, more alert, and maybe, just maybe, more compassionate. What had started as one painful night had become a lesson for an entire community, a reminder that even in small towns, the smallest moments can shape the biggest conversations. And while the final outcome was still unknown, one thing was certain: the people of Brookside were finally awake. The following week began quietly in Brookside, but the calm was misleading. Everyone was waiting for one thing: the official findings of the investigation. The streets felt heavier than usual, like the whole town was holding its breath. The police department, City Hall, even the small diner near the post office. Every place buzzed with low conversations and guesses about what might happen next. Alicia tried to go about her daily life, though nothing felt normal anymore. She still went to class, still worked part-time at the local community center, but every time someone recognized her,
she could feel the change in their tone, softer, more careful.
Like they didn't know how to speak to her without mentioning what had happened. She didn't want sympathy. She just wanted to move forward. But everywhere she turned, the past followed. People still brought up the video, the interview, the mayor's speech. It had all become part of Brookside's story, and she was right in the center of it. One afternoon, she walked to the park to clear her mind. The air was cool and the trees were starting to turn golden. She sat on a bench near the pond, watching ducks glide across the water. For the first time in weeks, she felt calm. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. For a few minutes, she just wanted quiet. Then she heard footsteps. Turning her head, she saw her father walking toward her. He smiled faintly when he saw her sitting there. "Thought I might find you here," he said. She smiled back. "How'd you know?" "This is where I used to come when I needed to think," he replied, sitting down beside her. For a moment, they both just watched the water in silence. Then he took a deep breath. "The report came in today," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Already?" he nodded. "It's been reviewed by the independent committee. They found that the officer violated conduct policies and used poor judgment during the encounter." Alicia felt her heart skip. "So what does that mean?" "It means the department will move forward with disciplinary action," he said. "There'll be an announcement tomorrow." She stared at the pond, trying to process his words. "Does that change anything?" "It's a start," he said softly. "But it's not the end." That evening, the news spread fast. Every local network mentioned that a press conference had been scheduled for the next day. Reporters returned to Brookside, camera crews setting up near the police headquarters. The town hadn't been this tense in years. The next morning, the police chief stood before a small crowd of reporters and residents. His face was serious but composed. After reviewing the findings of the independent investigation, he said, "Officer Daniel Mercer has been terminated from his position effective immediately," the crowd murmured. The announcement wasn't unexpected, but hearing it officially made it real. The chief continued, "We take accountability seriously, and we understand that our community deserves transparency and trust. We are committed to rebuilding that trust through training, reform, and open dialogue." When the news reached City Hall, the mayor stayed in his office for a few moments, taking it in quietly. He had mixed emotions. relief that something was finally being done, but also sadness that it had taken so much pain to reach this point. That afternoon, he held a press conference of his own. Standing behind a wooden podium, he spoke with sincerity. "This decision will not undo what happened," he said, "but it is a step toward fairness. No one is above accountability, not even those in uniform. We must continue to build a community where safety and respect go hand in hand." The reaction across Brookside was mixed. Many people felt justice had been served. Others argued that the punishment was too harsh or that the situation had been exaggerated. But one thing was certain: everyone was talking. In coffee shops, people debated the meaning of fairness. On social media, hundreds of comments filled the town's pages. Some thanked the mayor for standing firm. Others criticized the decision as politically motivated. Through it all, Alicia stayed quiet. She didn't post anything, didn't make statements. She simply watched as the world around her shifted again. Part of her felt lighter, knowing that something had finally been done. But another part of her felt uneasy. She didn't want to celebrate someone else's downfall, even if that person had caused her fear. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her bedroom window, looking out at the dim lights of the town below. The air outside was still. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. She thought about how small Brookside really was, how everyone knew each other's names and stories. She whispered to herself, "I just hope people learn something from this." The next morning, her father found her already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table. She had made coffee for both of them. "You were up early," he said, sitting down. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I was thinking about everything. Do you think things will change now?" He took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with people who care, and I think this town finally cares enough to start looking inward." Later that day, Alicia went to the community center where she volunteered. When she walked in, the children ran up to her, smiling as if nothing in the world was wrong. They wanted to show her their art projects, bright drawings of flowers, animals, and sunshine. She laughed softly, helping them hang the pictures on the wall. One of the teachers pulled her aside. "It's good to see you back," she said kindly. "You've handled everything with such grace." "The kids were asking when you'd come again." Alicia smiled. "I missed being here." That small, ordinary moment reminded her of what really mattered: kindness, patience, community. As days passed, things began to settle. The news cycle moved on to other stories, but Brookside still carried the echoes of what had happened. Town officials worked on new training programs for police officers. They also started a community committee to create better communication between residents and law enforcement. The mayor was invited to speak at several nearby towns about how Brookside was handling the aftermath. He didn't see himself as a hero, just someone doing his job, but he knew people were watching. He talked about how small towns often avoid uncomfortable conversations, but that silence only makes problems grow. His words resonated with people, especially parents who wanted their children to grow up in a place that felt safe and fair. Meanwhile, Alicia continued her studies and her volunteer work. Though the memory of that night never fully left her, she tried to use it to inspire good. She started a small campus project called Voices of Brookside, where students could share personal stories about respect, diversity, and unity. It quickly gained attention and support. When asked about it by a local reporter, she simply said, "It's not about me. It's about listening to one another." That's how healing begins. Months passed. The leaves turned, the air grew colder, and the town slowly returned to its rhythm. But under the surface, something had shifted. There was a quiet awareness that hadn't been there before, a sense of shared responsibility. At the Winter Town Festival, Alicia and her father walked through the decorated square together. The streets were lined with lights. Children laughed near the carousel, and music played softly in the background. It felt peaceful again, though different from before. They stopped near the big tree in the center of the square. "Feels good to see everyone together," her father said. "It does," she agreed. "I think people are trying." "They are," he said with a small smile. "You started something, you know." She looked at him in surprise. "Me?" "Yes," he said warmly. "Sometimes change begins with one person's courage, even if that person didn't ask for it." She smiled quietly, touched by his words. That evening, when they returned home, Alicia wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done in months. She didn't write about the fear or the anger. Instead, she wrote about hope. Hope that one day her story would be just a small part of a bigger picture, one where people learn to see each other not as strangers, but as neighbors, and for the first time in a long while she felt at peace. Weeks turned into months and life in Brookside slowly began to feel ordinary again, at least on the surface. The holiday decorations had been taken down, the streets were quiet and people had returned to their daily routines. But underneath that calm, everyone knew the next big moment was approaching: the trial. It had been scheduled for early spring. The case wasn't just about what had happened that night at the gas station. It was about everything that followed: the investigation, the reaction, and the question of fairness in a town that had always seen itself as peaceful. Alicia tried not to think about it too much, but the closer the date came, the harder it became to ignore. She still volunteered at the community center, still studied, still smiled when people greeted her, but deep down, she carried the weight of knowing that soon she would have to stand in court and tell her story again, this time in front of strangers, lawyers, and a judge. Her father, as mayor, faced his own quiet struggle. He wanted to protect his daughter, but he also knew that the law had to take its course. Every time someone mentioned the trial, his chest tightened slightly. He wanted the truth to come out clearly, but he also worried about what the process might do to Alicia emotionally. A few days before the trial began, the two of them sat at the kitchen table late at night, a single light glowing above them. Neither spoke for a while. The hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock filled the silence. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently. "I'm not afraid," she replied. "Just tired. I keep thinking about that night. I can still hear his voice sometimes. I just want it to be over." He reached across the table and held her hand. "It will be, and when it is, you'll be free of it. You've already shown more courage than most people do in a lifetime." She smiled faintly, though her eyes looked distant. "I just want to tell the truth. That's all?" He nodded. "That's all you need to do." When the trial began, reporters from across the state came to cover it. The courthouse was surrounded by cameras and curious residents. Some stood outside holding signs about justice and fairness. Others just came to see what would happen. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The judge sat high above, calm and firm, while the lawyers prepared their notes. Alicia sat quietly near the front with her father beside her. When her name was called, she took a slow breath and stood up. Her hands trembled slightly, but she walked with steady steps to the witness stand. She answered each question clearly, her voice soft but confident. She described how the night began, how she had stopped for gas, how she had tried to stay calm, and how quickly the situation had changed. She didn't exaggerate or dramatize. She simply told what she saw and felt. The courtroom was silent as she spoke. Even those who had doubted her story at first seemed to lean forward, listening carefully. Her honesty filled the room with something that couldn't be denied: quiet truth. When the questioning was over, she stepped down and returned to her seat. Her father reached over and squeezed her hand gently. She gave him a small smile, relieved that the hardest part was behind her. Over the next few days, witnesses came forward, people who had been at the gas station, the clerk who had recorded the video, and the officers who had arrived later that night. Each person added another piece to the puzzle, painting a full picture of what had really happened. The defense tried to argue that the officer had misread the situation, that it was a moment of confusion, but the video and testimonies made it clear that his actions were not justified. During breaks, Alicia often sat quietly in the courthouse hallway, looking out the tall windows at the street below. She didn't like seeing her own story turned into a legal argument, but she understood that this was how justice worked. Slowly, carefully, through details and facts. Her father stayed close, always calm, always steady. Sometimes he spoke with the lawyers. Other times he just sat beside her, letting his presence say what words couldn't. By the end of the week, both sides had presented their arguments. The judge gave final instructions to the jury, and then they left the courtroom to begin their deliberation. Everyone else waited, some in the hallways, some outside under the early spring sun. The wait felt endless. Alicia walked outside for air, her heart pounding. She looked across the courthouse lawn where people stood in small groups whispering. She recognized a few faces from the town, shop owners, teachers, students. Some smiled gently when they saw her. Others simply nodded in quiet respect. Hours later, the courtroom filled again. Everyone sat still as the jury returned to their seats. The judge asked if they had reached a decision. The four persons stood up and read the verdict. When the words were spoken, a wave of quiet filled the room. The officer was found guilty of misconduct and reckless endangerment. The sentence would be decided in the coming days, but the outcome was clear. Accountability had been served. Alicia exhaled slowly, her hands trembling again, this time from relief. Her father placed his arm around her shoulders, his eyes soft and proud. For the first time since that night, she felt something like closure. Outside, the reporters rushed to share the news. Cameras flashed, microphones appeared, and questions were shouted from every direction. But the mayor didn't stop to give statements. He simply said, "Justice has spoken," and guided his daughter through the crowd toward their car. That night, Brookside was quiet again. The town that had been divided for months seemed to breathe together for the first time. People sat around dinner tables talking about the verdict, some satisfied, some unsure, but all aware that a chapter had finally ended. At home, Alicia and her father had a simple dinner. Neither said much at first. The television was off. The only sound came from the gentle clinking of dishes. After a while, her father spoke softly. "You know, I'm proud of you, not just for today, but for everything. You've shown grace through all of this." She looked up at him and smiled. "I learned that from you." He chuckled quietly. "Maybe, but you've taken it further than I ever could." Later that evening, as they sat in the living room, Alicia finally allowed herself to relax. She curled up on the couch with a blanket, staring at the soft glow of the lamp. The house felt warm, peaceful, a rare feeling after so many long months. Her father joined her with 2 cups of tea. "I did the hard part," he said. "I guess so," she replied, taking a sip. "But I don't want this to define me forever." "It won't," he said firmly. "This is just one chapter. What matters is what you do next." She nodded thoughtfully. "I want to keep helping people. Maybe study something that lets me work in community development. I want to turn all of this into something positive." "That's a good goal," he said, smiling. "And I know you'll do it." Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping softly against the windows. Alicia watched the droplets run down the glass, feeling a strange sense of renewal. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel trapped by what had happened. She felt free to look forward. Over the next few days, the media slowly moved on. Other stories took the spotlight, and Brookside began to fade from the headlines. But inside the town, small changes continued. The police department launched new community programs. Schools held discussions about fairness and empathy, and the mayor worked on policies to make sure similar mistakes wouldn't happen again. When the officer's final sentencing was announced, 2 years in custody, the town accepted it quietly. There were no loud celebrations, no anger, just a collective sigh that the long, painful process was finally over. For Alicia, the news brought peace. She didn't feel hatred or joy, just relief. She had never wanted punishment. She had wanted truth. And now she finally had it. On the evening after the sentencing, she took a walk by herself through the park. The air was cool, the sky clear. She sat on the same bench by the pond where she and her father had talked months before. The reflection of the moon shimmered on the water. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered to herself, "It's over." But in her heart, she knew it wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning. The experience had changed her, shaped her into someone stronger, more aware, more compassionate, and somewhere deep down, she felt grateful, not for what had happened, but for what it had taught her, that even in the hardest moments, calm and truth have power. As she stood to leave, a gentle breeze moved through the trees. The world felt quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, and for Alicia, that peace was enough. Spring passed gently in Brookside, and with it came a quiet sense of renewal. The trees along Main Street were covered in soft green leaves again, and the town's mood had slowly shifted. The tension that once filled every corner had begun to fade. Life was returning to its natural rhythm. For Alicia, things were finally starting to feel different. She had finished her semester at college and taken on more work at the community center. The children there always made her smile, and their laughter filled the rooms with energy that reminded her of everything good about small-town life. Still, there were moments when she thought about everything that had happened. The night at the gas station, the investigation, the trial. It all felt like a different lifetime now, yet it was part of her story forever. She didn't want to forget it, but she also didn't want it to define her. She wanted to use it as something that helped her grow, not something that held her back. One morning, she received a letter in the mail. It was from a nearby university, thanking her for agreeing to speak at their annual youth leadership event. She had been invited to talk about resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for what's right. When she first read the letter, she felt nervous. Speaking in front of a crowd wasn't something she had ever imagined doing, but after a while she decided it was time. Maybe sharing her experience could help someone else. Her father supported her completely. "You've lived through something that changed not just you, but this whole town," he said one evening as they sat together in the living room. "People will listen to you because you're honest. That's what makes your story powerful." She smiled softly. "I just hope I can say the right things." "You will," he replied. "Just speak from your heart." When the day of the event arrived, the auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and community members from nearby towns. The stage was simple: a podium, a microphone, and a banner that read, "Voices of Change." As Alicia stood backstage, she felt her hands trembling slightly. She took a deep breath and looked out at the audience from behind the curtain. There were so many faces, curious, kind, expectant. She reminded herself that they weren't there to judge her. They were there to listen. When her name was called, she stepped forward slowly. The audience clapped politely as she reached the podium. She smiled nervously and adjusted the microphone. "Good afternoon," she began softly. "Thank you for being here." Her voice was steady, but her heart was beating fast. She paused for a moment before continuing. "A little over a year ago, I went through something that changed my life. It was frightening, confusing, and unfair. But it also taught me about courage, about truth, and about the power of staying calm even when you feel small." The room was silent as she spoke. "I won't talk about every detail," she said, "but I will tell you what I learned. I learned that speaking up isn't about anger. It's about honesty. I learned that forgiveness isn't weakness, and it's strength. And I learned that one person's story can open a door for a whole community to grow." She looked out into the crowd and saw heads nodding. Some people smiled softly. Others looked emotional. "When I was younger," she continued, "I thought peace meant silence and not making waves, not standing out. But now I know peace comes from truth. Sometimes the only way to make peace is to face what's wrong and shine light on it." Her voice grew a little stronger. "I used to be afraid that what happened to me would define my life. But I've realized that we get to decide what defines us. I choose kindness. I choose courage. And I choose to move forward." When she finished, there was a long, gentle pause, and then the room filled with applause. It wasn't loud or rushed. It was heartfelt. People stood, clapping slowly, many with tears in their eyes. As Alicia stepped off the stage, she felt lighter than she had in months. A few students came up to her afterward to thank her, saying that her story gave them hope. One young girl told her, "I want to be brave like you someday." That simple sentence stayed with her. Over the next few months, Alicia began speaking at more events, small gatherings, school assemblies, and local community programs. She never exaggerated or dramatized her story. She simply spoke with honesty. Each time she found that people connected not just to what she said, but to how she said it, with calm and understanding. Meanwhile, her father continued his work as mayor. Though the town had faced difficult times, he was proud of how far they had come. He worked on community-building projects, focusing on trust between residents and local officers. Brookside had changed, not overnight, but steadily. One evening, the town held a small celebration to mark a year since the new community program began. It wasn't a grand event, just families gathered at the park with food, music, and laughter. There were no speeches, no politics, just people enjoying one another's company. Alicia stood near the fountain, watching children chase bubbles in the air. Her father joined her, holding 2 cups of lemonade. "Hard to believe how far we've come," he said, handing her a cup. She smiled. "It feels different this time, in a good way." He nodded. "People learned a lot, about patience, about listening, about standing together." She looked around the park, at the families, the officers chatting with residents, the laughter echoing across the open field. "It almost feels like a new town," she said. "It is," he replied. "And you helped make it that way." She laughed softly. "I just told the truth." "Sometimes that's all it takes," he said with a knowing smile. As the sun began to set, soft music played from the speakers. People danced under the string lights, their laughter blending with the sound of crickets. It was one of those simple, beautiful moments where everything felt right. Later that night, as they walked home together, Alicia looked up at the stars and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if things had gone differently?" He paused for a moment before answering. "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on what might have been. I focus on what is, and when right now things are good." She smiled. "Yeah, they are." When they reached home, she sat on the porch for a while, the air cool and still. The street was quiet, the lamplight glowing softly against the pavement. She thought about how life had changed, how something painful had turned into something meaningful. She had gone from being afraid to being a voice of hope. And though she knew life would always have challenges, she also knew she had the strength to face them. The next morning, she woke early and went for a walk. The town felt peaceful, full of life. She passed the old diner, the flower shop, and the little library on the corner. People waved as she walked by. Familiar faces, friendly smiles. When she reached the park, she sat on her favorite bench near the pond. The water shimmered in the sunlight, just like it had the day she sat there months ago, lost in thought. But now she felt different, whole, grounded, free. She took out a small notebook she had been keeping and began to write. The first line read, "What was once fear has become strength." She smiled as she wrote. Each word felt like a quiet promise to herself, that she would keep moving forward, keep choosing kindness, keep believing that good could come from hardship. After a while, she closed the notebook, stood up and looked around one last time. The park was alive with laughter and birdsong. The world was still imperfect, but it was beautiful in its own way. As she walked home, the morning sun warmed her face. She thought about everything and her journey, her town, her future, and realized that healing isn't a single moment. It's a path that unfolds little by little through courage, compassion, and truth. And as she stepped onto her front porch, she whispered softly, "This is where the real story begins."